Alright, so I am back, and before I actually get into today's video, I want to say a quick Happy New Year's to everybody out there. Hopefully everybody can hit their goals in 2024. As for me, my personal goals in 2024 is to hit around 5,000 subscribers on this channel. But none of you guys care about that. Let's actually talk about today's topic. And so in today's video, I decided let's take a little bit of a step back. Let's reflect on 2023 before we actually enter into the 2024 season. I plan on doing this every single January 1st, so just keep that in mind moving forward. So in today's video, we're going to talk about every single team's biggest event that happened for them this year. So without further ado, let's just hop right into it. We're going to do these in alphabetical order, starting off with the Arizona Cardinals and ending off with the Washington Commanders. So number one, the Arizona Cardinals, the biggest event that happened for them was the beginning of the Jonathan Gannon era. After the horrible hiring in Cliff Kingsbury, they brought in a more experienced coordinator in Jonathan Gannon, and thus far this year, I would vouch to say he's done a pretty good job. Moving forward, he is going to continue to implement his game plan and schemes, and hopefully he can take the next step as a head coach. Next up, we have the Atlanta Falcons, and unfortunately, Atlanta Falcons fans, your biggest event that happened this year was the Desmond Ridder experiment. And unfortunately for you Falcons fans, it did not work out at all. You guys are probably going to be getting a new quarterback this offseason. Next up, we have the Baltimore Ravens, and I had a couple of different things we could talk about in this video for the Baltimore Ravens, but for me, the biggest event that's happened this year is the domination of what has been the 2023-24 season. Lamar Jackson will win the MVP, and I think Lamar Jackson is just on a completely different level than almost every other quarterback this season, and I'm sure that feels absolutely amazing for all you Ravens fans out there. Next up is the Buffalo Bills, and the big event that happened this year for them was the loss in the divisional round against the Cincinnati Bengals. When you're a team with Super Bowl aspirations, your biggest event is always going to be happening in the playoffs, and unfortunately, this team really didn't have anything happen this offseason to warrant being anything bigger than that game. It did end in a loss, but it was a very fun game nonetheless. Next up, we have the Carolina Panthers, and the biggest thing that happened this year was the Bryce Young trade. Now, whether or not you actually think that Bryce Young could be the future quarterback for this team, they still made the trade. And while I think he could be a very good quarterback for many years to come, some people are a little bit more skeptical than I am. They basically put all their poker chips in on Bryce Young, and thus far this season it has not worked out. The team around Bryce Young is absolutely horrible. The head coach was fired, and David Tepper's throwing drinks on fans. It's just been a bad year for Panthers fans. Next up is the Chicago Bears, and I would say the biggest thing that's happened to the Chicago Bears this year has been the experiment of Justin Fields. Now, unlike the Falcons who were experimenting with Desmond Ridder, it actually has been an up and down roller coaster with Justin Fields. The start of the season was really bad for Justin Fields and everyone was calling for his job, and then more recently, everyone wants him to stay as the quarterback for the Chicago Bears. Fans are very fickle regarding Justin Fields. Some fans want him gone, some fans want him to stay, and it just kind of seems to fluctuate depending on how he performs. But regardless of how the fans feel, it does appear the Chicago Bears are ultimately going to stick with Justin Fields, and I think the experiment has been somewhat successful. You could have probably said the Bryce Young trade was also a big deal for the Chicago Bears, but I didn't want to double down on just one trade. So I'll put that as the second biggest thing that happened to the Chicago Bears this year. Next up, we have the Cincinnati Bengals, and the biggest events that have happened to them this year was arguably the divisional round win against the Buffalo Bills, but for me, I think it's just been injuries. Coming off of a season where you lost in the AFC Championship game, I had thoughts that this team was actually going to win the Super Bowl this year. In fact, if you go back to my second channel, I have a video regarding who's going to win the Super Bowl, and I actually predicted the Bengals to win it. And while they still have a shot to make the playoffs, I believe, don't quote me on that, this team ultimately has had so many injuries, whether it was the Jamar Chase injury, whether it was the Joe Burrow injuries, or the new Joe Burrow injury, and now you're starting your backup quarterback. It's just kind of been a rough year for Cincinnati Bengals fans. Next up, we have the Cleveland Browns, and I think the biggest thing that happened to the Browns this year was the Deshaun Watson experiment. And I don't really know if experiment is actually the right word for it. I think more than anything is just playing Deshaun Watson. If you want to say the Joe Flacco event is bigger, I'm not going to necessarily disagree with you, but I just think that it's been so short-lived that I can't quite put it above Deshaun Watson. It seems like all year long we've just been watching Deshaun Watson and hoping that he goes back to that Houston Texans form, and it just has not happened, and I think Browns fans are struggling to think about what this team should do at the quarterback position moving forward. Hell, nowadays you have people saying that Joe Flacco should take his job next year, which is just kind of ridiculous, to be honest with you. But now let's move on to the Dallas Cowboys, and the biggest thing that's happened to the Dallas Cowboys has been the defeats to the San Francisco 49ers. And it kind of sucks that's the biggest event that's happened for the Dallas Cowboys, but it's kind of true. They had a really good offseason, and they've played pretty well this season overall, but you can't deny the blowout loss to the San Francisco 49ers this year, and then the loss in the playoffs to the San Francisco 49ers last year. It not only broke the hearts of every single Cowboys fans, but I think it kind of hit them with reality checks over and over again, so I have to give that as your biggest event. Next up, we have the Denver Broncos, and the biggest event that happened to the Broncos this year was the Russell Wilson debacle. And honestly, it's just kind of been a full year-long thing. The first part of the year, there was the questions regarding regarding the head coaching staff and what Nathaniel Hackett was going to do and what they were going to do when they hired somebody, and then it was the Sean Payton stuff, and then more recently it's been the benching and the eventual cut of Russell Wilson. And whether or not you have personal connections to Russell Wilson and feel like he should be the quarterback of the future for the Denver Broncos, it does not appear this team is going to go down that route, and overall the Russell Wilson experiment, quote unquote, has been a total failure. Next up, we have the Detroit Lions, and the biggest thing that's happened for them this year has been Dan Campbell. And I say that because Dan Campbell has been a man of his word. Every single year this team has gotten better and better, and this year they are officially the winners of their division and are having a super bright future moving forward. And I think a lot of that has to come back to the fact that Dan Campbell has been the biggest thing that's happened to them and has been a total revelation for that team. Next up, we have the Green Bay Packers, and the biggest event that happened this year was the passing of the torch between Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love, and I would say thus far this year it has been kind of successful. Sure, the Packers probably won't make the playoffs, but ultimately the fact that they're even in the conversation to make the playoffs is very impressive. And I think Jordan Love is definitely proving to be the quarterback of the future. I think he has been excellent, especially these past couple weeks. Next up are the Houston Texans, and I think we all know what I'm going to say here. It has been the 2023 total off season, whether it was the hiring of their head coach to the CJ Stroud and Will Anderson selection. All in all, the Houston Texans had not only a great off season, but a great draft, and currently this year they're having a phenomenal season because of how good the off season actually was. Next up, we have the Indianapolis Colts, and similar to the Houston Texans, the biggest event that actually happened for the Indianapolis Colts was the Anthony Richardson selection in the last year's draft. Now, what you're currently watching is his current Florida highlights because he just hasn't played a whole lot this year, and I think that had he played more this year, I think this team could easily be the number 1 seed within their division. I think the hiring of Shane Steichen and the combination of him and Anthony Richardson is going to be absolutely phenomenal for the Colts moving forward. Next up, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the biggest thing that's happened for the Jacksonville Jaguars has been the disappointing 2023-24 season. Whether it's been injuries or regression from players or just not the progress you want to see from studs like Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne and so on and so forth, it has been a bit of a disappointment to this season. Granted, if you are a Jaguars fan, I do think the Jaguars can turn it around and have a great playoff run. I just don't see it happening right now. Next up, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, and the biggest event that has happened for the Chiefs has been the Kadarius Toney and the Marquez Valdez-Scantling drops. I'm just kidding. It was, of course, their Super Bowl win against the Philadelphia Eagles, where they were absolutely dominant and had a great game against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, unfortunately, this year has not necessarily gone the way they probably would have liked it to be, but nonetheless, you still were Super Bowl champions last year, and you can hold that over everyone's head until the new Super Bowl champion has been crowned. Next up, we have the Las Vegas Raiders, and the biggest event that happened to my personal favorite team was, of course, the Josh McDaniels firing. And boy, when I tell you, when that announcement was made that he was getting fired, I jumped out of my apartment, I ran across the street, and I was screaming hallelujah. Josh McDaniels was one of the worst head coaches of the entire history of the Las Vegas Raiders, and thank God they fired him. I absolutely love Antonio Pierce, and I think he is going to be a great head coach moving forward. But next up, we have the LA Chargers, and the biggest event that happened for the LA Chargers is very similar to the Las Vegas Raiders. It was the firing of Brandon Staley. Now, I'm not a Chargers fan, of course I'm a Raiders fan, but I guarantee you, most Chargers fans had the same reaction as I did. I guarantee you they were running across the streets butt booty naked saying hallelujah. And for once in a million years, I think all Raiders fans and Chargers fans can shake hands and agree that it has been a rough year for both their franchises. But at least you guys have Justin Herbert, so fuck you. Pardon my language, I just get really passionate about my Las Vegas Raiders. And next up, we have the Los Angeles Rams, and the biggest event that has happened to the Los Angeles Rams has been the development and the progress of all of their young talent. Whether it's some of the young guys on defense or some of the young guys on offense, mainly Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams, this team has taken the next step because of the young talent. And a team that was once very old and was looking like they were going to be bad for many years has drafted so well and just brought in such great talent that this team officially has become one of the better teams inside the NFC. You could say that they have been arguably the most shocking team of the 2023 year. So congratulations to the Rams. You're going to have a great team for many years to come because you guys are good drafters all of a sudden. What the hell? Next up, we have the Miami Dolphins, and the biggest event that has happened for the Miami Dolphins has of course been Tyreek Hill in his current MVP-like season. I think it is a very fair statement to say that this team right now would not be where they are today if it wasn't for Tyreek Hill and his crazy year he is currently having. He currently has the most receiving yards in the NFL, and there's a very strong case that he should actually win the MVP, but I don't think he's going to win. I think he will win the Offensive Player of the Year award, which, by the way, I have an award show coming out here very soon, so keep an eye out for that. Now on to the Minnesota Vikings, and the biggest event that happened to the Minnesota Vikings was the defeat in the wild card to the New York Giants. I'm sorry, Vikings fans, but you guys finally made the playoffs with Kirk Cousins, and it looked like you guys were having an excellent season, and unfortunately, it all came crashing down in one game against the New York Giants. And I do think that loss ultimately did have a little bit of a carryover effect into this current season because the beginning of this year was extremely rough, and then it kind of evened itself out as the season has gone on. Unfortunately, Kirk Cousins did get injured, and I did consider that for the biggest event of your year, but ultimately making the playoffs and losing to the the Giants was pretty bad. Next up, we have the New England Patriots, and there's a couple of different things you can talk about for this team, but I do think the biggest event that has happened this year, or at least is going to happen very soon, is going to be the eventual firing of Bill Belichick. I consider moving on from Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi and so on and so forth, but ultimately, your franchise head coach who has been around for multiple years will probably not be on this team next year, so I do think that warrants the biggest event of this current season. Obviously, the Patriots have absolutely disappointed this year, and I do think they're going to move on from him and eventually take a new franchise quarterback and get a new franchise head coach to eventually become, hopefully, the new Brady and Belichick for this Patriots franchise. Now on to the New Orleans Saints, and there's been a lot of things that have gone wrong for the Saints this year, so of course the biggest event that has happened for them this year has been the failure of the Derek Carr experiment. Whether it's him getting yelled at by his own O-line or him yelling at his own receivers, it has just been horrible for the Saints this year, and this team has no hope moving forward. And I think Derek Carr is a good quarterback, but I just don't think he's the right quarterback for this team. They need to go young, they need to get some money, they are in a bad shape right now as a franchise. Moving forward, we have the New York Giants, and of course, the New York Giants have kind of had a roller coaster of a current season. They've been horrible, they've been decent, they've had some fun moments, but of course, the biggest event of this current year has of course been Brian Daboll and him winning the Coach of the Year award. I know everyone seems to be off the Brian Daboll train because of the current year he's having, but just look at the quarterback situation. Daniel Jones is horrible, and I considered him being the biggest event of this year, but he did get injured, so ultimately he kind of lucked out. But I think the fact this team has Brian Daboll, who has carried this team to being at least an average team who can be competitive this year, I think warrants him being the biggest event of this year. Next up, we have the New York Jets, and listen, we all know the biggest event for the New York Jets. It was of course the signing and eventual injury to Aaron Rodgers. Man, when I tell you that stadium was electric when he came out there, to how disappointing they were when they found out that he tore his Achilles, it was an absolute roller coaster of a day, and I just felt so bad for Jets fans. From seeing the future and seeing hope and a glimmer of potential to win a championship to just all of it collapsing on their face in one moment, it was actually kind of sad. But next up, we have the Philadelphia Eagles, and a lot of people are going to say that this current year has been the biggest event that has happened for the Eagles, but of course they made the Super Bowl, so the biggest event of this year has been them losing the Super Bowl. And similar to a lot of teams that lost in the playoffs last year, I do think that loss has somewhat had a bit of a carryover effect into this year, because all their coordinators are gone, several of their players are gone, and they had a hard time replacing those guys, and those replacements just have not performed up to standard. As it sits current day, I don't see this team making it out of the wild card if they go up against a team like the LA Rams or the Seattle Seahawks. So for Eagles fans, it's been a rough 2023. You lost the Super Bowl, which, hey, at least you made the Super Bowl. My Raiders haven't made a Super Bowl in who knows how long. At least you can hang your head on the fact you made a Super Bowl, but regardless, you lost the Super Bowl, you had a horrible year this year, you had a bad offseason, it's just been a rough year for you guys, which I don't really feel any sympathy. You guys threw snowballs at Santa Claus. Except with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I don't think I really need to say what the biggest event is. I'll just let the fans say it for you guys. So yeah, that's that. Let's go ahead and move on to the 49ers, and of course, again, kind of obvious one here, it is of course Brock Purdy and the emergence of how great he has been. Brock Purdy before the Ravens game was arguably the winner of the MVP award, which I have my own personal feelings out regardless of what they say, but nonetheless, he was still the odds-on favorite to win the MVP. He has done a very good job of being the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. Regardless of what you feel about him and whether or not he should have won that award, he's been a great quarterback, and he's arguably been a top 10 player this year. From a guy who was once Mr. Irrelevant to now being arguably a top 10 quarterback, you have to give him a ton of credit, and that kid is going to get an absolute bag from the San Francisco 49ers in just a few seasons. On to the next team, which is of course the Seattle Seahawks, and the biggest event that happened for them this year was of course the drafting of Devon Witherspoon, who was my odds-on favorite to win the Defensive Rookie of the Year award, which, by the way, I predicted him to win the Defensive Rookie of the Year award, and a lot of my predictions actually came true this year, so I might make a separate video regarding all my predictions before the season started to what they look like now. If you guys are interested in that, I think that could be a pretty fun video. Back to the Seattle Seahawks. Listen, your defense has not been spectacular this year. It has gotten exposed by teams like the Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers, but ultimately, Devon Witherspoon has been a very good player for this team. He's good in coverage, he's strong, he's physical, he's lanky. I like him a lot as a player, and I do think he's going to be a very good corner moving forward for that team. But please just fix up some of the safety and linebacker problems, and I think this team can be very good moving forward. Moving forward to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and of course the biggest thing that happened to them this year was the retirement of Tom Brady. And as we enter into the 2024 year, let's go ahead and let the GOAT tell you his announcement himself.
Good morning, guys. I'll get to the point right away. I'm retiring for good.
There's just nothing better than Tom Brady on a beach. I love it. Moving forward, we have the Tennessee Titans, and the biggest event of the Tennessee Titans' current year has been the evolution and ups and downs of Will Levis, their new franchise quarterback. Whether it was his debut game where he went off for 4 touchdowns and looked like the upcoming Brett Favre, to being injured and having his team just struggle around him. Like I said, it's been a roller coaster, but I do think he has been their franchise quarterback, so give credit to Will Levis. I love seeing him progress and become the quarterback of the future for that team. But lastly, the 32nd team on this list is of course the Washington Commanders, and I kind of hate to end on a kind of a negative note, but the biggest event for the Commanders has been the Sam Howell and Ron Rivera experiments both failing. And to defend both Rivera and Sam Howell, I don't think Rivera should have been the coach this year. I thought he should have been fired last year, as well as Sam Howell has shown moments of being a really good quarterback, so maybe if they get a new head coach, he could be the guy. But I just think this team is going to move forward in a different direction, and I don't think Sam Howell is going down that direction either. But the good news for him is that he's going to be a very good backup for many years to come, and is going to make an absolute bag as a backup quarterback, so don't feel that bad for him. But that is it for my official recap for all 32 teams' most biggest event. Yeah, I said that. Regardless, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because that helps me out a ton. And if you disagree with my list and have some pointers you want to point out as well, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to comment as I do to every single comment. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so again, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you guys have not. I think like 99% of you guys who watch the videos are not subscribed, so I forgive you guys, but just make sure you hit the subscribe button and like it for me as well. But I love you guys. Peace.